You're looking at Mother Nature build these mountains of water that are crashing down with intensity that nobody's ever seen.
Hawaii's biggest swell in years.
A storm with hurricane force winds. It's the largest ever recorded.
We'd heard it was undoable. It was just asking to die.
I've been waiting a lifetime to ride this thing out here.
Legendary surfer Laird Hamilton has pioneered the sport of riding huge waves.
He was just fearless. We all thought he was crazy.
Laird would do these things that nobody'd ever seen.
When he was out there surfing, it was like he was in his backyard playing with his toys.
He's controversial.
Incorrigible egomaniac.
He's as radical as they come.
Reckless, visionary.
The legend started to grow.
The broader surfing world turned away from him.
I was a little bit of a radical, full of testosterone and just obnoxious.
He would pop of the wave and fly in the air and do a flip. He didn't even care if he ate it or not.
He created a monster. As far back as I can remember, the ocean is where I could hide. I could get away from the land. That was where all the trouble was.
Laird completely redefined what it meant to be a surfer.
He has demanded quite a bit of his body.
He's had multiple injuries. There's definitely a roadmap of damage.
I don't know how much longer he's going to be able to do this.
I think sometimes we all feel like we're limited, and we are, but maybe less than we think.
He has to conquer that. That's what defines Laird.
We're subjected to Mother Nature. You made a mistake, you paid. When you did the right thing, you were rewarded.
What a beautiful trailer. Congratulations. I saw the film a few times. Love it so much. I'd love to talk to you about what brought you to the character of Laird, you know, how you got connected. It's a little different than the stuff you've done before.
Yeah, it is. It is a bit of a departure for me, but it's certainly a fun one. Laird and I actually live a few miles away from each other in California, so we had met each other. Coincidentally. I was living here in Brooklyn for many years, but we moved out to California about 8 years ago, so I had a chance to meet Laird, and then we were introduced formally through a mutual friend, Paul Speaker, who had the idea of bringing us together to make this film. And you know, it was a process of kind of understanding Laird and his story. I love surf films, and I love, you know, I grew up watching both surf films and films about skiing and extreme sports, and so I have a kind of natural affinity to that. But I was less interested in doing kind of a traditional surf film and more interested in doing, you know, finding a story. And I wasn't sure what the story was, but as I did some more research and explored it more and spent some more time with Laird, I was pretty convinced that he was a great character. So that was apparent from the beginning.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, Paul is such a great character in the surf world as well. I mean, was it something about that gave you the chance to sort of really consider it, Laird? You know, it coming from him, the connection to Rory?
Well, I think that to have first of all, a woman's perspective and then an intelligent woman's perspective, I think that would be something that would give it the potential to be more relatable to everyone, because I call it a human story. It's not about surfing. It's just we have giant waves in the background. Those are always helpful because they're entertaining.
Helpful for a filmmaker, for sure.
No, it's absolutely beautiful. And Rory, I mean, did you do any research into surf culture? I mean, how familiar were you with the world before?
Well, you know, I had seen a number of the documentaries related to surfing, so I was familiar on that level. I had never surfed until I moved out to California, and then, you know, I've gotten on a surfboard a few times. So,
big wave?
Nope.
Big for her. It's all relative.
Exactly. Thank you. Very small waves. Yeah. For me to reach the level of fear that he needs, I just need a 2-foot wave, and I get to the same point. So, you know, I was somewhat familiar with it, but I wasn't, you know, it was not part of my experience in any meaningful way. So it was definitely something that I came to, I would say, as an outsider.
Yeah. And Laird, I mean, you've had some experience with film before, documentaries before. How is this experience different? Obviously, your personal life is a lot more involved in this story and your whole career. I mean, how is it different for you?
Well, definitely more intense, and you know the depth of, you know, first of all, all of their work, all of Rory's work and Mark's work, just in the archival research that they got. I mean, I kind of learned some things, or I got proof of things. You know, I had stories that I'd tell, and that, you know, I was wondering if they were real or not, and then she got photographic evidence, and I'm like, I guess I wasn't that off, because, you know, you say things, oh, I did this when I was a kid, and I did that, and, you know, and after a while it becomes more like a dream. Is it for real or not? And then you see the footage, but you know, it definitely more intense and more emotional. I mean, you know, there's footage of my mother and me when I'm a little kid, and then going through the stories. I think that's an emotional process, and just all the things you've been through. You know, I said to someone, you know, we're all going to see this film about our lives. It's just normally we're going to be dead to do that. So I'm just doing it early. You know.
And how's that feel? I mean, how is it to watch it in a theater, see it play out, and see these people speaking about you in this way? I mean, what does that feel like?
Well, I mean, again, you go through the gamut of emotions. You know, you're honored to have people appreciate what you do and respect what you do. You're saddened by, you know, my mom's not here. I mean, you go through all the spectrum of emotions, and it's exhausting. And I think I've seen it a few times now. I kind of, if I can avoid watching it, it's nice, because I don't get quite as exhausted from it. But it's an exhausting. I mean, if you see yourself, you know, in situations that you risk your life, and those replay, you get some of that emotion from that, so it's nice to not have to watch it every time it plays.
I don't take it personally.
I mean, the one-on-one interviews are so fantastic. I mean, I think you mentioned something last night at the premiere at the Metrograph, you know, that he sort of handed you his phone book, and he said, contact anybody. I mean, were there any people that you contacted that you were like, this is an unusual perspective or a unique perspective that I'd love to have in the film?
Well, you know, and as I did say last night, I'm really grateful to both Laird and Gabby, because they, you know, I think it is it's risky to have somebody take your life and package it and put it out in the world, right? And we didn't really know each other, and you're making a 2-hour film about 53 years of life, which has been pretty jam-packed when we're talking about Laird. So, you know, that's a risky thing. And Laird and Gabby were very open. And there was really a sense of, we're going to hand this over to you, and we trust that you're going to do something interesting with it. And they introduced me to many people, some of whom they had estranged relationships with, right? And said, go and talk to them and say, you know, speak to them in whatever way you want, and say anything in this film. And it was important for me going into this to have editorial control over it. And they also handed that over to me. And, you know, I showed Laird the film and Gabby the film once the film was locked, and I explained what locked meant. Right?
What does locked mean for everybody out there?
There's no changes, you know, that happen up to this point. And you know, I think that there's events in the film that are difficult to watch, and, you know, aren't always so positive or flattering, but are true and real. And I think that, you know, Laird and Gabby were very brave in accepting that and enabling me to put it together in the film that it became.
Yeah, I think it expresses the drive behind him even more, actually. And then I think, you know, Gabrielle Reese, a wonderful wife. I mean, I think she gave you a little advice about interviewing Laird before. What was her advice?
Yeah, she said make sure he's fed and exercised before.
You don't want to talk to you before that.
Very cooperative at that point. I have to sit here? Sure. No problem.
I mean, when people are, you know, hearing that you're doing a movie on Laird Hamilton, I feel like, you know, obviously one part of the culture, myself included, is like Laird Hamilton, surf god, you know, everybody knows about him. And then some people don't really know his story, don't really know his career. I mean, was there difficulty in sort of expressing the breadth of his work and what he's accomplished in the span of 2 hours? I'm sure that was a little daunting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to say there's a lot of stuff on the edit room floor that was very difficult to let go of. But the film, you know, as is, it's almost 2 hours in length, so we really struggled to kind of keep keep it down to the time frame that it was, but and it's a nice problem to have as a filmmaker, to have too much footage. And I mean, one of the great things with this story is the archive, and so much of Laird's life, and this was during a time where people weren't necessarily, documenting themselves in the way that they do now with iPhones, as we see right here by this
Always.
woman.
We're plugged in here.
Yeah, so, it was over a time span where that wasn't really the case, and yet there was a lot of really amazing footage of Laird, and some, a lot of footage that nobody's seen before, some very intimate family footage that we were able to find, and then some more dramatic big wave footage. And I think it really helps kind of bring his story to life.
Yeah. Laird, I mean, you mentioned some of the things that were difficult to watch, but also there's things like the Millennium Wave, these moments in your life that are completely impactful, I'm sure, for yourself, more so. What's it like to watch those moments relive this time in your life? I mean, was that an interesting experience? I mean, what was that experience like?
Well, again, another set of emotions, going through another set of, I mean, again, the intensity of the emotion of those experiences comes out. I mean, it's kind of dulled over time, but it's something that that kind of can be uncomfortable at times. I think it's, hey, watching a movie about yourself is a little, my perspective is to be, I'm honored by it, but there's a certain kind of humility that you need in life that makes it somewhat embarrassing at times. It can be embarrassing, like, oh, you're watching a movie by yourself. That seems kind of awkward. So, and then you get into a third party, like you're observing yourself watching yourself. That you just so I try not to dig into it too much. I'm like, yeah, okay. And people said, would you change anything about it? And I go, well, I can't really change my life. So, and I only have one of these particular films in me. At this point,
it? No sequel in the works.
Well, I also think, I also made a documentary about my mother, and I haven't done that many biographies, but I've done these too. And I think for both of them, they are people who both live in the present and looking into the future, and they're not really, people who dwell in what's happened so far and looking back. And so I think, that's a certain experience that I would imagine is somewhat not natural or comfortable, right? I mean...
Absolutely.
I mean, you touched
on
something right there where you're saying looking towards the future. I mean, Laird's still, pushing boundaries. You're still living your life. I mean, you're following him as he's sort of doing the foil surfing, that sort of thing. I mean, what's it like to sort of document somebody was there a certain point where you're like, okay, that's it, that's enough, I have to cut it here, we have to stop filming here? What was that moment that hit?
Well, so there's kind of two stories that we're telling in the film. There's the past and kind of how Laird got to the point that he is today, and then we also tell the story of a more what I would call a verité story of the kind of current day story where he is foiling in an El Nino season and trying to find a big long wave to foil. And of course, in that storyline, we don't know if that wave is going to emerge. We don't know if we're going to be able to capture it. If it does, we don't know exactly when that will happen and if it will happen and where. And, we were very lucky, and so the film is able to sort of have the climax that you want.
Spoiler alert, there's a big wave.
Yeah, exactly. There's a big wave at the end of the film. And so, once we got that wave, then it was pretty clear, okay, we're good. We're good. I think we're done.
Can you describe the foil?
Get my hip replaced. Yeah.
Can you describe the foiling for people out there who maybe aren't familiar with that type of surfing?
It's connected really to what you're seeing in America's Cup and in a lot of sailing crafts right now. It's all about flying. It's about lifting the boat off the water, and you do that through kind of a unique shaped keel or a fin, which actually lifts the boat and makes the boat a lot faster and reduces surface tension and friction and gets you above the chop. I told someone it's a little bit like it's like having suspension. You go from a rigid frame motorbike or cars without shocks to shocks. And so now we have shocks, and that makes you be able to drive faster across rougher terrain And so we're flying faster across rougher terrain, which allows us to ride bigger waves. And it's part of our continued evolution to pursue trying to ride the biggest surf in the world.
It's like riding a unicycle in a hurricane.
It's beautiful. I mean, your board is like right off the water. It looks amazing. I mean, some of the shots are incredible. I mean, when you're doing a surf film, obviously a lot of surf documentaries, I think you've made this point before, where the waves don't really seem as big as they actually are. What was that process of filming those things? What did you use? What equipment did you use to sort of film those scenes?
Yeah.
It looks amazing.
Thank you. I mean, we struggled with that, and that was part of what was interesting and appealing to me about doing this film, because I've done mostly social issue documentaries, and this presented a whole new range of challenges that I had never experienced before, like how do you film a guy on a huge wave, foiling down it, and what do you do to do that? And, the truth is that Laird has had a lot of experience doing these kinds of films, so I did lean on him for advice and also for his crew, who had a lot of experience, whereas, the crew that I usually work with is very land-oriented New York City dwellers. So, that made a big difference, and we ended up, we used a combination of devices, but we really ended up including, drones and GoPros that are the small cameras that we would put both on Laird and on the jet skis and the foil board, and then filming a little bit from the water. But there were limitations in the jet ski. The jet ski's a little bumpy, and because he's foiling, and we're going on waves that are much deeper into the ocean and further away from the shore, it was harder to do drones because you really need to be on the shore to control them. And the jet skis, they're bumpy, and the person in the water now, because Laird is able to stay on a wave for a much longer time, it's not a breaking wave. You can get him for 10 seconds on the water, but then he keeps going. And so really what we found to be the most effective and efficient way to film him was from a helicopter. And we ended up having a great crew, which was the helicopter pilot and the cameraman. There's two ways to do it from a helicopter. You can mount a camera at the bottom of the helicopter, and then you can sort of control it from 360 degrees, or you can have a cameraman who's holding the camera where it can be more intimate and connected, but you're limited to the single shot of looking out one window. We ended up doing that shot for a range of reasons, and I think it really worked out. But, one thing that you really come to appreciate is the importance of the helicopter pilot, both in not killing you, which was of concern, and secondly of, and I hope you all do watch the film, but in the final shot, and I was really paying attention to it during the last screening, it's such a beautiful dance between what the helicopter pilot, because we're on Laird and it's a long shot, it's an unbroken shot, so it's one shot for about a minute and a half where he's on the water, and there's the shot of him heading towards the camera, and we're going on the helicopter, we're going backwards and sideways so that the window is facing Laird, but then it's like this beautiful choreography where the helicopter pilot goes around him and goes actually behind him and then comes back in front of him, and you're sort of going up and down with him, and it's such a beautiful dance. And I would like to take some amount of credit for the shot, but it's really like, Don Shear, the helicopter pilot, and Laird have worked with each other so much, and there's sort of an intimacy that they have with each other that the cameraman was able to capture. It's a really beautiful shot and moment.
Don is an amazing, probably one of the best helicopter pilots in the world.
And I give him so much credit for that shot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but anyway.
Well, because of his experience, it allowed him to move around me, the subject, in a way that brings an intimacy to it that you wouldn't have if you were just chasing along and moving and staying stagnant.
Right, and you might, and if you didn't have that experience, you would be a little scared to lose the shot, and you would just stay on that one angle, which it was the safer angle to stay on, but also knowing where Laird was going to go on the wave and understanding foiling and surfing and Laird, and then there's there's also
flying the helicopter backwards with the door open with the guy hanging out.
And by the way, water was like coming into the helicopter, and there were many times which you might not appreciate, but now I hope you will, where we're actually below, like Laird is above us, and there were people from the shore who I saw later that day who were like, we saw the helicopter and then it would just disappear under the waves, and I was like, yeah, there was like water coming into to the helicopter. I mean, it's he gets all the attention, but it was very scary for me.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, Laird, I'm sure the question you get asked more than ever is, what does it feel like to be on a big wave? What do you feel like? What camera was that angle? I mean, what sort of camera, shares that feeling? What? Well,
it's difficult.
Yeah.
That's the difficulty, I think, of capturing the emotion. How do you capture the emotion with unless you're in somebody's face and you're absorbing all of their reactions? But again, working with somebody like Don Scher, the pilot, who moves it in a way and brings you the sensation of speed and gets low and brings these other angles that begin to kind of let you feel the sensation of it. I mean, to describe the feeling of riding a giant wave, it's one of the most consuming experiences that I've had on living on this planet at this point. And I've done a lot of different crazy things that are supposed to bring that out of you. And it's a combination of flying and you feel. I feel like in that experience that you are at one kind of with nature. You're participating like you would, like an animal would. Like when you see an animal in nature, you see a dolphin swimming or you see a bird flying, and the intimacy they have with the surroundings that they're in. It's all encompassing. It demands every one of your senses at the highest level. Your smell, your hearing, your vision, the taste. Everything is on high alert, especially because of the threat. So the threat always accentuates everything because of your body's like, hey, I gotta. I need to survive this situation. I better be awake.
And it's impressive how long your career. I mean, how long you've been able to do this. I mean, I feel like you were only able to touch a little bit about his training regime. But I mean, what are you doing on a daily basis? I mean, can you tell us a little bit about a day training for you? What it's like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty. I would say I really enjoy continually evolving. So I'm always implementing new protocols and kind of trying to be a student. Always be a beginner and not get too comfortable with a routine where you kind of plateau. So I'm always looking for new, and you can call them hacks if you want to. And it's. I mean, this time of year is my off season before the winter starts. So we're in a more of a routine. We're 6-7 days a week, and we're doing, whether it's pool training with weights underwater, that you see some footage of that, and to beach sand work, to cardio, hypoxia training, breath hold cardio stuff, to breath work and somewhat meditative breath work. I mean, everything really in my life is kind of pointed in that direction. I mean, that and surviving giant waves and surviving parenting. Those are my two kind of, those are my two focus, and each one is pretty similar. So I mean, you want to be in a really good physical and mental state for parenting and for big wave riding, and so. But it's it's the food you eat, the way you sleep, what you read. I mean, everything goes into it. I look at it like a wheel, and every spoke is important, and none. You can't think that the products that you eat and the quality of your sleep and your hydration and all of this stuff doesn't affect every single one, and if anything, just your confidence, just to build your confidence and know that you've done, almost every single thing in your power to be prepared.
Absolutely. Well, now we're going to throw to the audience for a couple questions. So right there.
Hi, Rory, Laird. Thank you very much for being here. Can't wait to see this movie. Really excited about it. I guess I just had one question after recently, not being a surfer, but recently seeing a movie about bunker sprinkles. Bunker 77. I was just wondering first if you saw that, and two, if you ever had a chance to surf with a guy, and if there was like a difference in surf culture between that kind of self-destructive and.
Have you seen the film? Yeah. So I mean, I knew Bunker, and I did actually an interview about Bunker in that film. I knew. Well, I was very young when I knew Bunker, and you know, it's a Bunker story is a little bit of a sad story, but I think if he just would have stayed in the water and stayed surfing, it probably would have saved his life. At least it worked for me. But yeah, it's. I mean, you know, I think it's. You know, his story really has to do with, you know, what money can do to you, which isn't always great. So, but the ocean, you know, I mean, Bunker, when he was surfing and when he was young was when he was at the peak of his kind of health and happiness. Yeah.
Next question.
Awesome movie. So in this movie, your friends say that you're missing that fear mechanism. And so is that really true that when you're on these giant waves looking at the wall of water that you don't feel any fear?
Yeah, I think that's a nice disclaimer. It's easy to say people aren't scared. I think I'm one of the most scared. I think being scared is, you know, is connected to good assessment. I think when you really understand what's going on, it's hard to not be scared if the waves, you know, you have a 100-foot wall of water about ready to land on your head. If you're not scared, then I would question your intelligence. So, you know, it's an important part of our existence. The fact is, we just don't need to be scared enough anymore like we did in our evolution. And if we were scared more, we would probably react better in situations that we were scared and not just, you know, be in terror, but actually do the right thing the best we can in those situations. So, you know, I have a good relationship with it. I talk about it, and that's probably the most you know, question that's asked the most often is, you know, all this thing about being scared and fear, and you know, I think I'm attracted to it. I think I like it. I like the way it makes me feel, especially after I'm done. But the hardest thing for me to do is watch. If you said, "Hey, sit on the cliff and watch these giant waves," that would give me anxiety like I can't even tell you. Where if I'm in it, and I'm not, and I can participate. If I can't participate, that's more difficult.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, and it's connected to sort of Laird's training. You know, there's a lot of physical training that Laird does, but it's a lot of mental training as well. You know, I think that working with weights on, you know, he's got like 200-pound weights underwater, right? So you're dealing with panic mode. You know, your body is saying, this really bad idea, what the hell are you thinking, right? And so he's working with that voice in his head and working through that. And, you know, the same is true when he's in an ice bath, which I personally have done for 3 minutes, and it's really uncomfortable. But your head, everything in your body is saying, don't do this. Don't do this. And, you know, and same with the saunas. He does saunas at 220 degrees or, you know, and we'll sit in there for an hour. I mean, it's very uncomfortable. But I think a lot of that process, we were talking about this last night, is getting your head comfortable with fear and discomfort and being in control of that a little bit and being able to have your conscious self be in control as opposed to your unconscious panic chatter self. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. You know, you develop a relationship with it, and the more comfortable you are at being uncomfortable, then the less it affects you when you are. Then you're there and you're like, okay, here we are again. I know we don't want to be here, but, you know, and that makes you react, you know, better in those situations, which results in success normally.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was a huge part of what attracted me to this film was that idea, was that relationship of pushing yourself and pushing the envelope into that uncomfortable zone that we all experience to some degree at different times, and then some of us push ourselves into that zone more. But why do you push yourself? What do you learn from that? What's the teaching zone in there? And I think that Laird's managed to do that not only on a personal level and evolve himself, but in terms of changing the sport. And because of that drive to push and to be comfortable in that zone.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
Hi. Laird, first off, I wanted to thank you. I discovered Laird Superfoods.
She's
You're not alone. You're not alone.
Thank you so much for bringing those products to market. I was wondering, you know, is that an area that you're looking forward to expanding in, kind of in the food nutrition world, or are you looking to pursue other projects in other areas?
I mean, for me, honestly, I feel that I want to expand in every direction towards positive health, improved quality of life for everyone. I mean, the selfish ambition is that I want to have it be better for me, but then the result is that you can, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So it's about, whether it's XPT performance training, that process, and helping people ice and heat and all that thermoregulating through nutrition. I mean, these are all areas that I hope this film has the same result, which is that there's some inspiration aspect. If one person sees it and goes, oh, you know what, I've been wanting to do this one thing my whole life, it's my dream, and they go do that, I feel like it's made the whole process worth it. So for me, those are just, the superfood is just another piece of that spoke, the spokes in the wheel that to push out health and try to improve my own life and my friends' lives, but other people's lives as well, because I think it's what we need to be doing down here.
Well, I think you'll do just that. And Take Every Wave is available on demand now, and we'll start playing in New York tomorrow. Congratulations, guys. Give them another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Laird.